Hey folks, Dave from Nerdarchy, for Nerds by Nerds, and today I'm hanging out with Greg from Grimjack, and with a bunch of numbers behind it. But you don't have to look for them or quote them because you can just go right to the description. You can find some links there and see where Greg is playing on stream games, where he's streaming games, all that good stuff. And we were kind of just talking beforehand, like how you got started. With streaming and even like you're an old dog coming back to the hunt. You know, you've been out of RPGs for a little while and you started back up recently.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. It was a forced separation. I did not want to go. They pulled me screaming and kicking into the workforce as I desperately crawled and grabbed for my second addiction books as they pulled me away. But yeah, it was just, I guess, a little over a year ago now that I got back into reading and kind of just not playing or not participating in the games, but just getting back into them a couple years back. And then with Critical Role and all that great stuff, and you guys and Will and Pruitt, Will from Encounter and Pruitt and Jim, and here I am smacking my arm every day, hoping to play a little bit more, man. So
we are legion, we are many.
Right,
and
growing.
And welcome back. Like as a channel, as as a company, as a business, what we do and what we love to do is bring people back to the hobby, bring new people into the hobby. I think one of the cool things that we've experienced from doing this is the number of people that have come back and they see, well, if these old guys are still playing, I guess we can too. But like, what else are you going to do with your time? Sit around, getting drunk, living for the weekend?
Right. Yeah. But the beauty about this hobby, my man, is that you can, before this, you would try to recapture some of that RPG stuff with video games or board games, which I still love very much, but there's only a finite amount of time that you can do those things in any given work day, or you have to go somewhere to play with your friends, which, that becomes troublesome when you have kids and other responsibilities. But this, I can walk downstairs. I can sit in front of my computer and my screen, talk to you, talk to other great people, play games across the world and across the worlds. And it is fantastic, man. It's just technology. I think it's bringing a ton of us back. It's introducing a ton of people. But that's the only reason why I am able to play in these games anymore, is that the technology caught up, man. We're not quite at holodeck level yet, but we're getting there, and I'm confident that I'll be playing with Picard sometime soon. We'll
someday. So since you've been back in gaming, is it all stream stuff? Is it all on the internet? Do you get any in-person gaming in?
I get what ended up happening was the reason why I got back into playing was my son. My son got old enough and he was looking around and he goes, wow, what are all these? Hey, I found a great book. It's Dragons of Autumn Twilight. I grabbed my chest, and when I woke back up, I said, that's a great book. You should read it. And then we can do other things. And so he tore through all of the Dragonlance saga. And I said, now guess what? You can make a character like that. Well, Dad, how do you do these things? And I, cracked open the old book, blew the dust off. This is how you do it. And then as soon as I realized that's how they used to do it, and there's 5th edition now, I said, wait a minute, this is how we do it. And we started making characters. And then my best friend and his brother joined us, and I started running games for just right on the couch for all my buddies and my son. And that was the way back in. And I still play with my kids every day. My daughter just turned 8. She is a tiefling warlock. So I guess that bodes poorly for me in the future. But as of right now, in D&D terms, it's great. And it's, playing in person is so much. It's a lot of people have said that, you lose a lot whenever you're not playing in person. I find that it's different. I'm not sure how much you're losing, because you have just access to so many more people. You have the ability to play with people from different countries and things like that, which that in and of itself just opens the book, so to speak, on so many more things. But I love doing both, man. I'm looking forward to going to Gen Con and just playing nonstop. So.
I find playing in person for me is more about fellowship, while playing online is more about the game and less about the people, unfortunately. That is kind of, so they both lose something, in my opinion, right? If you play in person, you kind of lose a part of the game itself, because you spend so much time outside of the game and just socializing, which is fine. But when you play via the internet, I feel like you lose a lot of that socializing, and everything is more focused on the game.
Everything's hyper condensed online, because you can't have we were talking about it before. The way to equate the streaming experience, and this isn't a grand revelation, is it is very much a performance. There's more of an attention or detail given to the performance, because if you took cameras and just set them in front of all of us sitting around the couch or the table at home and playing, people would say, my God, this is boring. The one dude was talking about how he got sick on his stomach last night because of what he drank, or, and then we're laughing and telling jokes, and then we roll a couple dice, and then we laugh and tell jokes. And for anybody that's not sitting around the table, I think there's an exclusion that is felt. And when you're streaming, you've got to be very cognizant that you have people that want to see the game and hear the story and all that stuff, but they're not necessarily into watching me chew on pretzels.
Oddly enough, I have a hard drive full of videos that I'm supposed to get rendered and uploaded from our in-person games, and people every week bug me about getting those games up there, and it really is us sitting around the table. I mean, we change a little bit, but not that much, and I break them in half just to make it a little bit more manageable, so it's not like 4 or 5 hours of that. But it really does surprise me, at all different levels, people are interested in watching other people play this game, and I never thought that would be the case or a thing.
Oh man, that's the craziest thing. When I first started getting on YouTube and watching all of these videos, you go surfing, you watch Will Wheaton do tabletop, and you're like, oh man, that's what a great idea. And then you see, oh, everybody has great ideas here. And then you watch somebody else play a video game, and then watch them play an RPG. And for me, I immediately thought I would like to do that, but there's just a I don't know, a witnessing culture out there right now that wants to be an audience, an eternal audience for that, which is absolutely 100% fine. It's amazing that it exists. It's very weird to me that there wants to be, which is strange because that's what I'm doing now. But I love watching other people. Critical Role is what got me into this. And it just spurns me. Like you said with the coaching tree, man, once you do it, you want to do it. You watch it, you want to do it. They watch it, they want to do it.
Yeah. We were talking about Will Jones before we got started from Encounter Roleplay, and I was saying how I have a love-hate relationship with Will, and I also bust his balls about I tell my kids to look up to. They should be looking up to him and not worrying about what school they're going to when they finish high school. I'm like, because Will has never worked a real job. He still has a great somebody in his life. He has a career that he likes doing and enjoying. It just shows what you can do, what someone can do. And the world has changed, and I can't preach to my kids to keep preaching what my parents preached and their parents preached before them, because we don't live in that world anymore. But so I'm envious of Will in the fact that he's never had a real job, and I think what he does is great. And
oh, absolutely, yeah.
And now, I just need to figure out, now I have to sleuth this, or I need someone to do it, to figure out how many channels has Encounter Roleplay spawned.
How many has he birthed?
Yeah, because I can think of at least 3 off the top of my head.
Oh, yeah. I don't go back far enough to know exactly who, if it was a simultaneous arrival, but I mean, And if he hasn't actually, I often think about the people that were on his channel as cast members that started their own channels, but also how many people watched Encounter Roleplay, perhaps weren't cast members and were like, oh, I got to give this a shot. I like the cut of this kid's jib, and just did it independently. He is responsible. He is at the tip of a lot of the pyramids of addiction. And that's a burden he has to carry with him, that he has brought us all so low.
But it's just great because there's so many, you can go on YouTube or Twitch any given day, probably any given time, and someone is streaming something live, probably multiple someones. But, that aside, let's delve into Grimjack. One, where does your username come from? And two, how you got started with your own Twitch channel.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Grimjack was, forever will be, my favorite comic book character. My brother grew up in the 80s. And while I was sitting there reading the X-Men and Iron Man and saying, oh, Rocket Raccoon, look how cool this is. My brother, who is always and will ever be cooler than me in that he plays music, always played music, he could carry a tune. I cannot. He was able to get up in front of people from a very young age and perform, and I could not. And while I was reading all of these, I guess, mainstream comic books, he found First Comics, which was an adult comic. I mean, there was blood and violence and adult themes, and one of their premier titles was Grimjack. And he said, very much like the gateway, here, man, read this. And he tossed down Grimjack #1 to me, and I read it and realized that the world that I had been experiencing between the comic book covers was a narrow one indeed, as I began to just devour Grimjack. And it was the greatest, just a fantastic story, and I carried him with me forever. So Grimjack I adopted, and Grimjack I will forever be, based on the predatory nature of my brother. Here, try this, then come back for more. So,
the first one's free.
That's exactly what happened. But I was able to get in there and see that. And then my channel, as it grew, we spoke about it. Will did a bunch of things, and I was just in love with some of the systems that playing with him and playing with Mike over on Unmade Gaming kind of opened up to me. And then I found more systems that I couldn't play in or weren't currently being played. And I thought, I want to experience them more. And how do I do that? And I thought, I'm too old to figure out this OBS thing, which I am. But I somehow figured it out and was able to run it. And I started with Pulp Cthulhu, Project Athena last fall. And it just kind of splintered and spidered from there. And we're running shows now, and it's super duper fun, just sitting around with my friends and having fun.
How many games are you guys running? I know you got Call of Cthulhu over there, Conan, maybe some D&D. I'm running. I wrote them down so I would not forget. But currently I am running on my own channel Friday, starting next Friday. It was going to be tomorrow, but now it's going to be next Friday, July the 6th. We're going to have Conan from 12 to 2 Eastern, followed by FireFly from 2 to 4 Eastern. And then on Saturdays from 2 to 4, I run a Pulp Cthulhu show called Project Kronos. And then on Sundays from 7 to 9, my original show, my Pulp Cthulhu Project Athena. And those are the 4 we're currently running on my channel. Flash Gordon's coming at some point because Flash Gordon, and I'm old, and that's my jam. So nice. Yeah. I met one of the writers at the Geek and Sundry party. I think it was at Gen Con. We had been talking for a while. I'm really embarrassed though because I forget his name. So
man, all I know is as soon as I saw that Kickstarter for Flash Gordon, and they said they were combining elements of both the comic, the pulp serial, and the movie together, I just that meme where the guy just throws his wallet at the screen is exactly what I did. That's my jam. My wife hates that movie, and I watch it every single chance I have. Just
Oh no, it might be grounds for divorce. Not entirely sure.
I've heard. I think there are papers somewhere in the house, and so I might be 1 or 2 clicks of the remote away from being served those. We'll see, though, man. I'll keep you informed. Follow me on Twitter.
How can you? But how can you not love Flash Gordon? It was so cheesy. It was great.
Dude, it was the best. It was the absolute best. I mean,
best soundtrack.
Oh, dude, right. And then you got Brian Blessed, who he's sitting there, just rocking the bikini bottoms with a Shakespearean trained actor from the Royal Shakespearean Company who just absolutely threw himself into the role of a Hawkman. And that's where you get these fantastic things, the amount of
he's on my list. That's on my list of cosplays that I would do. Like I'd be like, okay, who's got the beards, right? So I don't have to mess with the beard. And like Voltan is definitely on the list.
Right. Gordon's alive. Oh, I mean, that's the greatest thing ever, man. Just the absolute best. Yeah, but that's that. And then John Carter's coming out. I'd love to do something with that. And it gives me an excuse to go on Audible and download all of these fantastic compilations that they have now. And I can listen to Robert E. Howard's Conan stories while I'm doing my day job, which stinks, and I can listen to John Carter and all that great stuff.
How do you do a day job with all that gaming going on?
Shh. But it's a lot of one eye over the top of the computer with one earpiece in as I have arrayed before me things that appear to be from my normal job. And then a whole lot of work at night getting normal job stuff queued away. So daytime hours can be spent prepping, which is, man, love it. Love it. So
and you're also, you had mentioned the times, but what time zone are you in?
I'm Eastern. Eastern. So, yeah, everything is Eastern. It's all on Twitter if you guys want to join up and follow us. I have great people on all the shows, just fantastic friends, and a lot of great things. But I'm involved with and running a lot of other stuff across multiple channels, and it sounds silly to say, but I have met so many fantastic people that are friends that I communicate with on a daily basis. And as a kid in high school, growing up in the 80s and 90s, who sat with like 2 other guys that, we would just whisper about D&D or science fiction and nerd stuff, that being able to find a community like this is, it's really just it's heaven sent. I would never have thought about it 30 years ago.
We are out in the daylight now.
It's the greatest. It is the absolute best.
We've come out of our troglodyte dwellings beneath the ground into the daylight. We do exist.
Right. I was going to say it's slowly taking over. Like every element of pop culture has been like saturated with the 80s. And, D&D especially has risen from this almost, it was spat whenever it would said, oh, your son plays Dungeons and Dragons, to, I went into a parent-teacher, this isn't a great thing, but I went into a parent-teacher conference for my daughter who's in 2nd grade just this past fall. And the first thing she says to me, I hear that you play Dungeons and Dragons online. And yes, I do. And I think that even a year or 2 before that, it might have been a deflection, but I took that, the way she delivered it, it had a little bite to it. So I took her bite, I put that badge on my chest, I shined it up, and I said, yes, I do. I play Dungeons and Dragons online. So that wasn't there years ago.
Yeah. I think my kids like saying that I do this full time and that this is my job. And I'm right there with you. There was a time I definitely would not have been openly talking about, playing Dungeons and Dragons and doing this stuff. But you know what? As soon as I started making money doing it, it changed my perspective. And it changes other people's too. They're like, wait a minute, you're doing something you like, even if they think it's stupid, right? But they're like, you're doing something you like and you get paid money to do that. I'm like, yeah, pretty much. Enjoy your soul-sucking job.
Right. Yeah, man. You guys need to wave that flag every chance you get. And you're exactly right, man. As soon as you say, wait a minute, somebody, there's money in this? Yeah, dude. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people that this is a brand new form of entertainment. And, you know, when they realize that, just like you said, to them, it's sounding more and more like a job, which, but as soon as you enter in that money thing, it's strange how all of a sudden it gets a little bit more credibility.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, this morning, you know, before doing this, I spent like Nerdarchy spent like $1,000 paying taxes, or some other regulatory thing we had to do. I don't know. I just know it costed me money. You know,
Right.
you know, the state of New Jersey wanted their due. So
right, and then you know you've made it.
Yeah,
New Jersey talking, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Where are you at on the East Coast?
I'm in Maryland. As Maryland, and this is America, so I can tell you that if Maryland is shaped like a gun, which it is, I'm in the narrowest part of the barrel. That is the only way to describe it, and that's how everyone in this area describes it.
Do you know you got a D&D bed and breakfast in Maryland?
Yeah.
Fredericks, was it Fredericksville?
Frederick. Yeah, down in Frederick. I forget the. Yeah, but you can go down and play and.
Yeah. I tried getting them on the show. There was like one correspondent. Oh, all right, you don't want free advertisement. That's fine. I think they were confused. They're like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "We talk about D&D. It's a show. I don't know." But
and it's amazing how people. I even think that big companies, with the exception of D&D, who really has just come around recently, it was a complete. And I've talked about this backstage with a couple people. They're just coming around to realizing that doing this streaming stuff kind of opens up the audience, and you're able to get your products out there faster and invest more people in some of these periphery systems and things like that, where you don't necessarily have to have a table at a convention to try to lure in foot traffic. The foot traffic is the clicks on these different games and the views. And I think it's very funny that now it's, wow, there's this whole thing called YouTube and Twitch, guys. Let's go check it out. But I think that's happening, you know, and it's bleeding, I guess, at some point to everybody. But.
Well, if you look at Streaming Many Eyes, that goes to show, you know, like what's going on, and like they poured a lot of money and stuff into that production, you know. So it's what's possible. And whenever I talk to, you know, one of the companies that aren't. Somebody from one of the companies that aren't Wizards, because I'm like, why aren't you guys doing more with streaming? Like, it doesn't make sense that you wouldn't.
Right. And it's, I think it's just one of those things that it's going to be all at once. I think that some of the ones that aren't Wizards of the Coast, like you said, at one point, all of them are going to look around and realize that the door to that streaming audience is open, and they're all going to, like Three Stooges, run at it together, and they're all going to hit there at the same time. And you're going to see like organized channels and perhaps organized play, like, you know, Wizards of the Coast. And now we're going to have the spinoff with Critical Role's own Twitch channel, where they're going to have original content. We'll see. I mean, it's awesome. It's just fantastic that there's so many people that love the. Man, we talked about it. We were down in the downstairs basement, sitting around the table playing this game. And as we came back up to the surface now, man, there's just so many people, and it's amazing. I love it.
Oh, they still say the numbers aren't as high as they were in the 80s, which, you know, I don't know what data they use to figure this out. Just when I talk to like companies and designers, but you know, it's definitely come up. But it, you know, I guess because like there's so much community online, it just feels like there's more gamers than ever.
I don't see, and once again, obviously, I have a very narrow view of the 80s because we didn't have social media, and I definitely wasn't involved in reading any type of, business literature that spoke of numbers or anything like that. But just knowing from my particular slice of life, how few of us even knew about, would even admit to Dungeons and Dragons, or even reading Lord of the Rings, or even, reading this kind of, at that point, like a niche fiction. I just can't imagine now that it's so popular in media and cinema and Game of Thrones and things like that. I mean, people proudly talk about, oh, I love Game of Thrones. And, back in the day, that type of admittance would, might very well, you'd lose your lunch money if you were lucky.
Absolutely. So. Like when we would talk about gaming, we had code words. We would call it rocking out, instead of gaming. We were very, I guess it was very cliquey from what I remember of school. I imagine that hasn't changed that much. And it's like, so I was probably part of like the metalhead clique. And then there was the subset, right? Even in there that would game and talk about gaming. But we never want anyone else to know what we're doing.
Oh, right. And it's almost... Back in the day, you would have acceptable public conversations that were nerd in nature. Like, you knew if you were in an audience that could take Star Wars, where you would say, oh yeah, I can't, Star Wars and blah, blah, blah. And then you'd have to really know the room. Like the cafeteria, I mean, that was hit or miss. I mean, if you could whisper something about something, but if somebody caught just a little too much nerd coming off of you, it's almost like running with a wound through the Serengeti. Something was going to come after you. And that was,
you were brawling. There's a good chance you'd be brawling.
So. Right. And by brawling, that means, defensive posture, maybe taking a wild swing, and then darkness. And then lucky or unlucky, but I was like one of the bad kids, so I really didn't have too many problems with that. So... but the trade-off was I had a terrible childhood, so from my home life. DM Don has a question. The thing that scares me about streaming is I have already seen people afraid to play because they're intimidated by streamers. That and over the saturation of the scene thoughts. I don't believe in saturation in almost any field because I've heard people cry saturation from many different industries, many different niches. We were talking before we got started. YouTube is like rising cream of the crop. Like, we started doing something not particularly well, but we're doing it differently. People liked it. WebDM came on the scene and had amazing production value. And now there's even other channels that are coming on after them that are even upping production value in their own ways, and skyrocketing or doing things different. So like, that's just a matter of perception, and people will always be scared and afraid to do things no matter what. So maybe that's their excuse, but they might have just had a different one. Yeah. And with the saturation aspect of it too. And while I definitely, after being on this side of everything, and running a channel, really appreciate production when somebody has a fantastic 3D animated intro, or they incorporate music so expertly in their narrative. I know it's difficult to DJ all that stuff when you're also GMing or playing in a game, and I seriously appreciate that. But what I appreciate more, and it lends itself to the intimidation factor perhaps, or the saturation factor, is that I like a story. And if you want to get into it and start playing, but you feel intimidated by it, tell your story. Just like we talked about before, some people that maybe are prolific writers are intimidated to be public speakers. But I think in this particular medium, you're able to get away from those eyes that might be in the same room with you. And if you get up there and as a DM or as a player with like-minded players that you're comfortable with, or you find online, and tell a story, man, if I can just put in my earphones and close my eyes and be taken somewhere, you could have great graphics spinning around that screen, or you could have, You know, all of a sudden you're transported into space or whatever. That's great. But man, the story, if you've got a story to tell, don't let technology or saturation or intimidation stop you. It's the time to do it, man. Tell those stories. I always want to hear stories.
Well, you know, also I would add that people play the game for different reasons. And just because people see Critical Role playing it a certain way or streamers playing it a certain way, you don't have to play it that way. Like, their way isn't the right way to play it. You know, whatever you're comfortable with and what's fun for you at your table, that if you're a bunch of min-maxing munchkins and that's what your table likes, that's the right way to play it. You know, if you don't really care about the story and you really just want to roll dice and you like, you know, delving into the mechanics and you just want to kick in the door, kill the monster and take their stuff, that's the right way to play it. If you guys want to never touch any dice at the table whatsoever and play the game that way, that's the right way to play it. It just doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And by story too, I don't necessarily mean the one that you're weaving. There is a story involved with you playing the game. And that's just as entertaining to me and just as emotionally, I get as emotionally invested. Like we talked about my kids aren't there to tell. They want to, which dice do I roll? The pyramid die? Do I roll the one that looks like a circle? Yes. You know, and watching them light up. And when my daughter rolls a nat 20 and my son has one of the larger nat 20s that it flashes when he hits the 20, that to me, I mean, it's a beautiful sight to behold when the mechanics of the game tell a story. And I always say when the dice tell the story. And when there's a joy in rolling a piece of plastic, stone, or other material that enables you to imagine in your own head, you've just cut an orc down. There's a story. I love it, man. And there's no right or wrong fun. I completely agree.
There is a long period of time where we played just as it was the excuse to get together with your friends. Like for years in the middle part of my gaming career or whatever you want to call it, it was more about us just hanging out once a week and, you know, sure, you know, Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games it was just a thing that would happen when we got together. But it was just an excuse as adults to get together and do something. You know, we're not hanging out in the bar, strip clubs, or watching sports, or just drinking beer. This was the pastime that we enjoyed to socialize with.
And apparently you guys were planning global takeover, because in that interim between the 80s and Critical Role, there was just a fine-tuning of everything that was involved in what would be a pop cultural phenomenon reimagined in this time. And I kid, but I mean, you guys hit it out. I mean, it's that perfect convergence of what society needs, remembers, and wants. And, you know, they call it a renaissance, but man, it's a reawakening. It's crazy. Love it. Couldn't love it anymore. That's why I'm not sitting currently in front of a computer watching numbers go across the screen, and I'm able to be here talking with you about D&D, dude. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's so much better. And you know, talking about the streamer thing, I think, you know, the awareness of the hobby trumps all. You know, so just people seeing and knowing what it is and seeing it is going to be so much more beneficial than any of the detriments that could possibly be there. You know, even like I would have people say, well, I don't like fake gamers, right? And they would go on to tell me what a fake gamer was. And usually the example is like a significant other that comes to the table to just hang out. And, you know, those people are actually really important, especially before internet. Because that was probably the only way they were going to get introduced to the game. Now, whether it's stuck or not doesn't matter. You know, a certain percentage of them, I'm sure, got intrigued by the game and came back. Or if they were introduced to it later, they know what it was, and you know, it just expands the hobby. So, like, I don't care how people come to the hobby, how they get interested. You know, I've heard people say, well, these streamers are fake gamers because they're not really about the game. They just want to get famous or whatever. But I'm like, this is a terrible way to get famous and or make a living. So that doesn't fly. either. So I'm just like, you know what? The fact that they're being exposed to it, I don't care what their motivation was that got them here, because a certain percentage of them will be like, oh, you know what? Actually, I really do like this. And, you know, they can cross over from being the quote unquote fake gamer to a real gamer.
Right. And, you know, not to equate gaming, which is a hobby and it's open to everybody, to any type of, you know, being an expert at a musical instrument, or, you know, really good at baseball or something like that. But, you know, if somebody wants to be famous and they want to be, you know, they're in it for the wrong reasons. I mean, that's the same thing as saying, well, you know what? I'm going to get famous by being a classical pianist. Well, okay, that's easier said than done. And at some point, someone's going to realize, hey, man, this cat can't play the piano. Can we, you know, not listen to them anymore? Or, like you said, they're going to say, man, I got into this for the wrong reasons, but damn, this is fun. And at what point does that fake gamer become a gamer and contribute to the community and do everything that they maybe were going to use to make themselves famous, but then they just help everybody out? And man, that whole D&D gate thing, that just annoys the hell out of me, because that's a spin-off of all of this, where it's you're limiting somebody from getting into the community and into the hobby before they even get a chance to do it, because you question their motivations or their time spent. You know, listen, man, we were back in the 80s, and you way more than me is that you've been able to do this for decades. There's no you know, ribbon to be worn for getting your ass kicked in the 80s for liking D&D or being around since that time. I'm glad that you aren't. I'm glad that my kids can tell their friends they play D&D, or God forbid their teachers, that their dad plays D&D online. That's way better. So come in and play and sit down and have fun, man. Ugh. You can't play this game. Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, I mean, that part has always been weird to me. I mean, for the most part, like, we roll funny shaped dice and we play make believe. So any kind of like pretentiousness you want to wrap around that, like, it's a, right. And people, you know, even though I do this for a living, but there is people that take this way more serious than I do. I'm like, it's a game. You know, it's the most important part will always be the people.
Absolutely. And like I told you before, my favorite part about all of this and the ability as that the tech is afforded to playing these games now, all of the people that I've met, I have friends, not internet friends or social media friends. I have legitimate friends, people that if I called up and said, hey, you know, something terrible has just happened, the vast majority of them would be here. They would come to me in person, even if we've never met before, to help out, because they are friends. These are friendships that can be formed in a different way than maybe what was done 5 or 10 years ago around the table, but they're no less significant. And man, this experience, if I was doing it in front of 5 AI or, you know, computer renderings of people, I wouldn't do it. You know, it's 100%. You're right, man. 100% the people.
So switching gears, what do you prefer, playing or GMing?
Man, and that's the age-old question. I look forward to playing more. I think that I am a better player than I am a GM or a DM, but I really like playing. I really like stories that I can have a direct marionette control over. As a GM or a DM, they're not my stories. They're the stories that the players come up with. But I like being able to at least book in the world and, you know, throw in the villains and the problems and the complications and help to kind of fashion the world. But as my crew on Pulp Cthulhu's Project Athena will tell you, it's definitely not my story. But I am there, and there's pros and cons to each. I really like playing, though. Playing's a lot of fun. I have a halfling arcane trickster right now that is perhaps my favorite character ever. And 6 months ago, I had never played a halfling. I had never played an arcane trickster. And super fun, man. Just super fun.
Yeah, I always want to do the opposite of what I'm doing right now. That like, if I'm playing, I want to GM. If I GM, I want to play.
Dude, that's exactly what it is. Like when you're hip deep in prep or something of that nature, and you're like, man, why can't I just play? And then when you're playing, you go, ooh, I'd like to tell a story about, and then grass is always greener over the other side of the fence. But.
Prep. What is this prep you talk about? I actually have one group that I should prep for, and then I have another group that I really don't need to. The one group requires more direction, and they're less likely to like just do things. And then my other group, the Scarlet Sisterhood group that I run for, I show up barely remembering what happened last session, and it's like you just wind them up and they go. It's beautiful.
That's the best. That's the absolute best, when you can just sit down and you fire the gun and the story continues from where the players left off, and you occasionally throw in a speed bump or smooth the road a bit, and then it just continues to go. That's I have no problem at all doing that, but I get in my own head so bad, man, where I'm like, oh, what if they try this? Oh, I better create a language to make sure I know how to talk. Is this what are you doing? But I get nuts at sometimes, man, when I'm just thinking about I think what it eventually goes into, it harkens back to the 80s, where, like you said, man, when we were growing up, if you were lucky, you had a cool childhood. But it's always comes back to me as being that thing where I want to make sure that I'm living up to the standards, and I'm not dropping the ball on anything. And so prep comes to me like, if they start telling a story and they go in a direction that I haven't anticipated, I don't want to be the one that crushes an awesome story happening. And so my prep has grown from showing up with an index card to Evernote and tables and nonsense. And I swear, man, I never use it. I always just get in there and go, and the players are always there for me. I can't get around my own head about it, though. I have to be ready. I have to be the Boy Scout. I have to have the gun that's fully loaded. I can't go in with 5 shots in a 6-shooter. I need to be, I need to spin the cylinder and throw another one in. But
I just got tired of always doing the prep work and like writing full modules and be like, yep, I used about a paragraph of what I wrote tonight. These 3 pages don't matter. And I'm like, eventually it just dawned on me, like, what if I just didn't write anything up? The game still happens. This is what I discovered.
Oh, man, when I started running the game for my son and my friends, I wrote this whole big branch off. Oh, if they, they're going up the Sword Coast, and once they hit a particular set, this whole mine sequence is going to be fantastic, and I'm going to do all this. Well, like players are wont to do, they completely bypass the entire area, and I was left with this very region specific thing that had to happen, and I just took that binder and set it aside, and that's where I began to realize, why am I doing this? And then my brain would say, because you can't let them down, and then that argument continues to this day. So
yeah, I feel like the best plot twists that I've ever entered into any of my games, they've all come from the players. I just listen to what they say and be like, because they like to speculate on what's coming, and what if it's this, or what if it's that, or this is like that, and I'm like, yeah, I think it's going to be like that now. Absolutely, that was way better than anything I would have came up with.
Oh yeah, and I mean, if the best point is when sometimes, and I've had a very loose experience with this, where there is a mistake made by the GM or the DM where they believe that they're telling a story. Like in earlier example, me forcing the group to go into the area that I made. The best ones come when they do their own thing and it's a collaborative storytelling, or we're rolling dice and the GM is able to read that and say, this group just want to just roll, man. Okay, here comes a battle. And then everyone at the table is happy, fun is had by all, the game's doing what it is loosely meant to do. And yeah, man, but prep, it is my absolute bane.
How much time do you spend prepping?
Oh, dude. I usually
time for DM confessions.
Oh man, I usually want to have all of my shows that I run on my channel are 2 hours long. So I like to be able to have at least 4 or 5 constructed moments in each of them, because I run different systems. So it's not encounters or puzzles like you would have in D&D, but it's whether it's a social test or a situation like that, I want to have enough where my players are able to make choices and zip off in different directions, but they seldom use any more than 1 or 2, and then I on the fly Project Athena on Sunday nights, I bet you I use half of one, and then let's try this, and then I'm scribbling and trying to figure out something to do on the fly, which is the greatest feeling in the world.
Laura Lana was raving about your games.
She's a sweetheart, and please tell her I said that, because I never, ever, ever want to be on her bad side. So, no, she's legitimately a sweetheart, but also terrifying.
Yeah, I get a little bit of that vibe. We're playing in the Greyhawk game with together with Grant Ellis, so. She's been a blast. That whole crew has been a blast to game with.
Yeah, I'm actually starting a show on Greyhawk this Saturday night called the Valley of Soot and Skull, and I get to go back to the very first world that I played in as a wee lad, and we are taking 15th level characters into an epic confrontation that hopefully works in with Shane's backstory that he has going on with the world of Greyhawk right now. So that's at 9:00 Eastern Saturday evenings for the summer. So I think we have 6 or 7 sessions, not counting the week of Gen Con, and then we're going to tear through some high level stuff, which should be fun.
I'm kind of
fun for me.
I'm kind of amazed and kind of tickled at the same time that people are still playing Greyhawk. One of my first stream games, one of the first stream games I was invited to play in, and I'm like, Greyhawk? Who plays Greyhawk anymore?
Well, that's what I told. I was talking to Shane, and I saw, on the Greyhawk channel. You mean that Greyhawk? Because then I looked at it. And I'm like, hell, it is that Greyhawk. I'd forgotten everything about Greyhawk. I'm still just barely scraping by on my knowledge and like my application for it. In fact, the story that I'm running is not Greyhawk specific beyond the politics associated with the quest and whatnot, but it's really cool to go and smash the dust in a land that I first played in, because I went Greyhawk and then I went right into Ravenloft, were my first 2 things I ever did in D&D, and they have definitely dominated my thoughts in everything I've done forward. In fact, when I came back, the very first thing I ran was Curse of Strahd, because I'm like, hey, I know this, and just I love Strahd too. So
Strahd, how can you not love Strahd? Yeah, our early games were kind of like Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance. Like we played like in all the campaign settings, and like actually when I was first playing, like Ravenloft was a module; it wasn't a setting yet.
Right. Yeah.
And then once we started, which would kind of like turn it, the group that would eventually like spawn Nerdarchy. But once we started doing that, it was like all homebrew. From then on, we never looked back. We never touched anything that was pre-written for the most part. I did a short stint of a campaign with Eberron, but I think of all the games we played, that was the only one that was a campaign. I mean, we've dabbled in Dark Sun a little bit, but the generic fantasy settings, we didn't. If it was generic fantasy, it was going to be our generic fantasy as opposed to Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, or Greyhawk.
Right. And nowadays, whenever I run anything D&D related, I find that my choice of picking a world to place everything in, really, especially for streaming and stuff like that, it goes by what assets are more readily available to me to be able to use in what maps. Okay, Forgotten Realms got a ton of maps. Okay, well, that's probably where I'm going to go, just because I would be able to use those assets. But that's the extent of it. When I ran Curse of Strahd, I realized after about the first 2 paragraphs, I'm going to change a ton of this. And I love the world and I love elements of it, but after that, it was all homebrew. So, I like dropping into Cthulhu lends itself well to certain elements of modules and adventures, because there's things that you can draw out of those and kind of reskin for different things. But that's all part of homebrewing nowadays, and it's
Do you have a favorite system now?
I think 5e lends itself just for the pickup quality of it, but I think that if I'm introducing somebody into any system nowadays, my rules light version, which came from Will, his rules light version of 7th edition Call of Cthulhu is really easy to get people to the table, especially when I found that the jump between I've never role played before and I'm role playing an elf in D&D, that's a bigger jump than I've never role played before. I'm role playing in the 1920s as a newspaper reporter. Oh, I know the 1920s, and I think that in and of itself lends itself to more associations. And Cthulhu, because of that, has become one of my favorites. So.
Now, the only argument I would make towards that, and it's not really an argument towards that, but if you go the other way with someone who's played RPGs, especially Dungeons & Dragons before, and go into Cthulhu, it completely changes the game and how they want to play the game because they want to kill monsters. And Cthulhu, the Cthulhu Mythos is not about killing monsters. It's about just trying to get away with your life and your sanity, which pretty much never happens. Spoilers.
That's the toughest thing to convince somebody that's come from another system that, one, what do you mean I have 8 hit points? And 2, when something pops out, the instinct is, okay, well, I unload into it with my gun. And, if you've played Cthulhu more than once, you need to run and hopefully learn enough that if you're lucky, half of your group leaves alive, but incredibly insane. And that is a win in Cthulhu. That is a gold star ending to a campaign in Cthulhu. Only half of us are dead. The other half's crazy. We've won. But
I've found there's like 2 different veins of fans when it comes to Cthulhu. There is the fans that are in love with the idea of Cthulhu and the Cthulhu mythos, and then there are the fans that are actually into the Cthulhu and Cthulhu mythos. People, there's fans, but they've never actually read any Lovecraft. So I'm like, well, you don't really, I don't know if you can really grasp and understand Cthulhu and what it really means without having read Lovecraft. And it almost should be like a primer if you're going to play a Cthulhu game.
Right. You should be given one of the shorter stories, like The Color of Space or something like that, where you can read it and then you can say, oh my God, the main character's crazy and or dead. And then you read another one, you go, the main character's crazy and or dead. And then you're like, okay, here, play Call of Cthulhu. And then when you end up crazy and or dead, you go, this is just like, I love it. It's just like the books.
Yeah.
So I think that you're absolutely right. It would definitely get people ready for the terminal nature of Cthulhu.
Well, the great thing about Lovecraft and Cthulhu mythos, any of it, is they are generally all anthologies and they're short stories. None of them are particularly long. So, if you wanted to jump in, you could read a bunch of them and get into it fairly quickly. And the writing's a little archaic, but it's still good stuff. I really enjoy it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just right now, like I mentioned before, with Audible, I'm listening to Robert E. Howard's Conan stories. And the level of detail that he put into just his regular descriptions is unreal. And they're good if you can get past some of the era specific, Howard wasn't as bad as Lovecraft, but there were still racist elements to it. If you can get past some of that, which is difficult, the stories themselves and some of the sexist comments, more in Lovecraft again, but it's definitely amazing to go back and see what was considered pulp literature at the time. And, regular literature had the same racist and sexist comments as well, but it was more accepted, obviously, because it was tabletop books. But the pulp stuff was so well written, and it's, just now becoming re-explored or whatever.
There are some really good reimaginings. There was an anthology that I had read. I don't know if I read it all. I read quite a bit of it. It was World War Cthulhu, and it was just an anthology of all these Cthulhu stories that that happened during different wars. So the war was just the backdrop of the setting, and they're Cthulhu stories, so they all went the way all Cthulhu stories pretty much ever go. Even when you have a gun and you're in a Cthulhu story, like most of the time the characters like try it once and then they're like, this isn't working, and then like you said, you know, they die or end or go insane in some combination thereof.
I saw a great T-shirt one time, and I'm going to paraphrase, and it obviously isn't this long, but the gist of it was, I don't need a holy avenger, and had a picture of a sword, and on the back it said, I'm playing Cthulhu, and it was a picture of a book. And I thought, there you go. You know, because in Cthulhu, if you find the tome that has the answer and you do the library research, which welcome to role-playing games where I'm going to roll to see how well I can read, you know, and then I found it. That's Cthulhu. The incredible, you know, spectrum that you get to run through in RPGs is fantastic nowadays. So
now you are running or starting Conan?
I am running Conan, and it starts a week from tomorrow. So we will be going a week from tomorrow, July the 6th at 12 noon Eastern. And that one I'm real happy about. It's got an interesting little trope that's well used, but the cast that I have, it's a 10-person cast. So I'm able to zip in and out of different time periods and have different groups, the same group, but different makeups of the group as players die and disappear and reappear and all that good stuff. So it's going to be fun.
So I take it it's very episodic.
Yeah. You'll be able to watch one episode and not have to have seen the 3 that came before it or anything like that. You'll be reintroduced to the characters it's very much like my FireFly show. I wanted to do the FireFly show that I'm doing on Fridays the same way that it was kind of done with Joss Whedon, where if you saw one of those, if you saw Out of Gas or Heart of Gold, you'd be able to understand what was going on. And while seeing the other episodes would help you with character development, the story of the episode would stand on itself. And I think nowadays with the streaming and with so many selections to choose from, you need to be able to have a bite-sized episode that can be devoured on its own. And someone doesn't have to spend too much time to have a rewarding experience, both as a player and an audience member. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say. I find in a lot of our groups, it is just easier to run episodic because then you don't have to worry about who's showing up or who isn't showing up, and the continuality of your story. So we've spent a lot of time in our home groups trying to do that, but once like, you know, overarching plots begin, that becomes harder and harder, and you have to then either do some fancy footwork as the GM or you're just hand waving stuff. So there's definitely something to be said for that episodic feel, from both the player, the GM, and the audience member standpoint.
Right. And, you know, I think too, it's more of that podcast vibe where, you know, the podcasts run an hour or so for actual play, and that's a really good format, and that really is that drive home or that moment where you're out mowing the lawn and you've got something in your ear and you're able to listen to it and invest that much, you know, 45, 60 minutes. And I think streaming is not necessarily going that way, but I think having that option of a shorter episodic one moment that you can listen to it and get what you need to get out of it is definitely an option that should be available. And I like to do it that way, just to make sure that, you know, everyone, once again, I'm trying to please everybody, and that is never going to work.
No, it never does.
Prep and everything. So.
I like the 2-hour window for an online game. You know, for me, I feel like you do almost as much as you would have done in a 3 or 4 hour game anyway, if you were in person. And, you know, I like the condensedness of it. I also don't really like to sit at my computer for much longer than that for a game anyway. And also, like, when you're playing on a stream, it's, you know, you're less likely to get up for bio breaks or to eat and things like that. So that condensed game just really works.
Absolutely. And as an older gentleman myself, I don't want to be sitting here and I don't want to be a statistic in about 6 months where somebody says, "Hey, did you hear about Greg? Yeah, he's one of those guys that sat at his computer for too long and they just found him because he never walked, he never saw the sun, he never, So it's I think for the same reasons that it's good for the audience, it's good for the players and the GM as well to have these short little bursts, and then on to the next adventure.
Yeah, some of the streamers, I don't know how they stream as many games as they do. Although you're getting there, man. You're working your way up there. That's why I know I'm a content creator. I'm not a streamer.
Dude, I know. I'm like, right now, I'll just tell you. On Mondays, Atomic Cthulhu on Encounter Roleplay, 4:30 to 7:30 Eastern. Tomes and Tentacles comes out from Encounter Roleplay podcast every Tuesday. Tuesday evenings, I'm on Starward Bound over on WebDM for a couple hours. Wednesday, Call of Cthulhu, Doors to Darkness, 1 to 4 Eastern. Conan and FireFly, 12 to 2 and 2 to 4 on my channel on Fridays. Saturdays, 2 to 4 on my channel for Project Kronos. Then Valley of Soot and Skull and Greyhawk from 9 to whenever. And then Sundays, Project Athena from 7 to 9. That's my schedule.
That is 10 games, right? Did I count that right? 10 games in 7 days.
Yeah, maybe.
Right, and that's what? That's a minimum of 20 hours?
What did they say?
That's a part-time job, right?
Well, not if you're enjoying it, right? You'll never work a day in your life. Isn't that what they said? But the other thing is I think the first part of addiction is admitting that you have a problem.
Yeah.
And here with you, I'd like to admit that I have what society would call a problem. I don't see it though. I see it as fun. I'm making up for lost time.
Do you ever find it challenging to like get into the particular story you're telling at the time, either as the GM or the player, with that many hours of gaming in a single week?
I tell you what it is I think it could be, and I think that I've had problems before as a player in dropping back into a character. But when we do it, especially on Encounter Roleplay, where you do it at the same time of the week, I almost get into a routine. And if you've ever seen, whenever I'm bizarre, but I cosplay whenever I stream, and I put on a hat or an outfit or a tie, or I had a priest robe on yesterday. And when I do all of that, much like, taking the stage as a different character, it really helps me kind of drop back into the voice and the mind of the character. As a GM, it's a bit difficult, more difficult, but once again, man, that's my prep. I view prep as slipping back into that GM for that game, that DM for that game. It's a sickness, man.
Do you ever forget to be Greg?
No, my kids remind me.
I'm just envisioning you like slipping into your characters in your real life.
Well, see, that's the craziest thing. My kids, I wanted to make sure that when I do shows, and I have a job that allows me to do things during the day, as long as I put different, I put time in at other places. I want to make sure that, with the exception of summer vacation, I am streaming when they're at school, or I'm starting streaming when they're going to bed. So I still have my time with them and I still can talk with them, but they know every character I play. My son named my one character in Cthulhu, Jolly Edwards. He came up with that. So I want to make sure that while I play D&D with my kids, they're in the creative process with me for multiple reasons. One, I need their help because I'm old. And two, I want them to be, if they never played role-playing games as adults, perfectly fine, obviously, but it's also creative. And today with kids, man, they're in front of those phones and those iPads. But if for a moment we can roll funny dice and they can come up with a character name, or my daughter can have a purple tiefling, man, they're not playing on iPhones. They're playing in the imagination. And that's how I keep it. That's how I remember who I am. Is when my daughter's rolling a 20-sided die and she gets a natural 20 and screams nat 20, I know I'm Greg. So
Nice. Well, I want to thank you for coming on, Greg. I really appreciate it. Anything you want to leave people with before we head on out?
No, man, play games. Have people sit down beside you, shake their hands, whether it's virtually or in person. Play those games, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, players of all ages. We don't have to live in the basements anymore. And if someone tries to take your lunch money, scream for us. We'll be a couple million strong behind you. Thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out with us in the chat today. As always, you can look to the description to follow Greg and all the different games he's playing in, as well as on Twitter. So with that, until next time, stay nerdy.